Welcome, dear listener, to a journey through shadows and sunlight. Tonight, we will travel together through the hidden life of a man who lived two lives, who smiled at his coworkers every morning and washed blood from his hands every night. This is the story of Dexter Morgan, told from the very beginning, unfolding gently as the hours pass and sleep draws closer. Every chapter holds its own darkness, its own secrets, its own strange and terrible beauty. So settle into your most comfortable place, let the rhythm of this voice carry you, and we will walk together through every twist and turn of one of the most fascinating stories ever told on television. Our journey begins not with Dexter himself, but with the city that shaped him. Miami, Florida, a place where the ocean sparkles under endless sun, where pastel Art Deco buildings line the boulevards, where palm trees sway against cotton candy skies at dusk. Miami looks like paradise. The beaches stretch for miles. The nightlife pulses with music and warmth. Cruise ships glide in and out of the port like floating palaces. Tourists see the surface and fall in love with it. But beneath that glossy exterior, Miami has always harbored a different kind of energy. The drug trade carved channels through the city's veins for decades, bringing money and violence in equal measure. Organized crime operated openly through the 1970s and 80s, turning neighborhoods into war zones while the beaches remained pristine just miles away. The Miami Metro Police Department fought battles on multiple fronts, understaffed and overwhelmed by a criminal ecosystem that seemed to regenerate faster than it could be dismantled. This was the world that created Dexter Morgan, not the beaches and the sunshine, the other Miami, the one that existed in cargo containers and back alleys and interrogation rooms where desperate people made desperate choices. To understand Dexter, you have to understand where he came from, and that means understanding a woman named Laura Moser. Laura Lynn Moser was born on June 20th, 1946, in a small town called Bannon, North Carolina. Her parents were Dean and Emily Moser, ordinary people living ordinary lives in a place where nothing much happened and nothing much was expected. Laura graduated from Sherman Valley High School in 1964 at the age of 18. And like so many young people from small southern towns in that era, she eventually drifted towards something bigger. She moved to Miami, drawn by the warmth, the opportunity, the sense that life could be more than what Bannon had offered her. In Miami, she met a man named Joe Driscoll. Their relationship produced a son, Brian Moser, born around 1968. A few years later, Laura became pregnant again, and on February 1st, 1971, at 11:21 in the evening, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Dexter Moser, her second son, the one who would carry her memory and her trauma for the rest of his life. The family lived at 1235 Mangrove Drive in Miami. Laura had a distinctive habit of painting each of her fingernails a different color, a small act of self-expression that both of her boys would remember long after she was gone. Brian, the older brother, was quiet and observant, fond of his little brother in the way that older siblings sometimes are, protective without fully understanding what he was protecting against. Dexter was the more energetic child, laughing and running and playing hide-and-seek with his mother and brother in the Miami heat. They called him Silly Bear. He called Brian Beanie because he could not quite manage the full name yet. From the outside, it looked like an imperfect but functional family. A single mother with two boys, getting by in a city that did not make getting by easy. But Laura Moser's life was more complicated than it appeared. At some point during those early years in Miami, Laura became involved with drugs, not as a casual user, but as a low-level dealer working within the organization of a man named Hector Estrada. Estrada ran a significant drug operation in the Miami area, the kind of cartel that processed cocaine coming in from South America and distributed it through networks that stretched across the city. Laura was a small part of this machine, but she was part of it nonetheless, and that involvement would eventually destroy her. Her arrest changed everything. A detective with the Miami Metro Police Department named Harry Morgan brought her in, and instead of processing her through the system like any other low-level dealer, Harry saw an opportunity. He needed someone on the inside of Estrada's operation. Laura, facing charges that could separate her from her sons, agreed to become a confidential informant. She would feed Harry information about Estrada's drug shipments, his associates, his methods. In exchange, Harry would protect her and eventually help her start over. The arrangement was supposed to be clinical, a detective and his informant, nothing more. But Harry Morgan was a complicated man himself. He was married to a woman named Doris. They had a daughter, Debra, born around 1973, a couple of years after Dexter. Harry's marriage was stable on the surface, the kind of middle-class suburban life that looked right in photographs. But something about Laura Moser reached him in places his marriage did not. Whether it was her vulnerability, her fierce love for her boys, or something harder to name, Harry and Laura began an affair. It was reckless for both of them. A detective sleeping with his confidential informant compromised every aspect of the operation. If Estrada's people discovered that Laura was talking to police, the affair made it easier to connect the dots. And if Harry's superiors found out, his career and his family would be destroyed. But they continued anyway, meeting in motels and interview rooms, conducting the affair alongside the drug investigation like two parallel lives running on the same track. Laura became increasingly afraid as the operation deepened. She was rising within Estrada's organization, gaining access to more sensitive information, attending meetings where serious criminals discussed serious business. She knew that the higher she climbed, the more dangerous her position became. Estrada was not a forgiving man. If he discovered her betrayal, there would be no warning, no second chance. Harry assured her that he would keep her safe, that nothing would happen to her or her children. He made promises with the confidence of a man who believed his badge could protect against anything. Laura wanted to believe him. She had two small boys who needed their mother, and the only path back to safety ran through Harry Morgan and the Miami Metro Police Department. Another of Harry's confidential informants, a woman named Valerie Hodges, complicated things further. Valerie had her own relationship with Harry, and when he shifted his attention to Laura, Valerie noticed. The web of personal entanglements around a supposedly professional law enforcement operation grew more tangled with each passing month. But the investigation was producing results. Laura was delivering information that could bring Estrada down, and Harry's superiors wanted that outcome badly enough to overlook the methods. By late September of 1973, the operation was reaching its critical phase. Laura had learned about a major cocaine shipment coming into Miami, 300 bricks that Estrada himself planned to oversee. If Harry could catch Estrada with the drugs, the case would be made. He pushed Laura to continue, to steal some of the cocaine as evidence, to stay in the game just a little longer. Laura pushed back. She told Harry she wanted out. It was too dangerous. She had been followed. She feared for her life and for the lives of Brian and Dexter. On Friday, September 28, 1973, Laura sat in an interview room at the police station holding 2-year-old Dexter on her lap while Brian was at school. She told Harry plainly that she could not do this anymore. Harry listened, nodded, and then asked her to continue anyway. He promised again that he would protect her. Laura Moser trusted Harry Morgan with her life and the lives of her children. In the days that followed that conversation, she continued her work as an informant, collecting information, attending meetings, pretending to be loyal to an organization that would kill her if they knew the truth. She did this for Harry, for the promise of a future where she could be free of Estrada and raise her boys in peace. But Hector Estrada was not as blind as they hoped. Someone, possibly Santos Jimenez, had been watching Laura and Harry. The meetings at the park, the visits to the police station, the patterns that, once noticed, could not be unnoticed. Estrada put the pieces together, and he made a decision. Laura Moser was a snitch, and in his world, snitches did not receive trials or second chances. They received punishment that sent a message to everyone else in the organization. The machinery of Laura's destruction was already in motion, and she did not know it. She went about her days in those final weeks of September, cooking dinner for her boys, painting her fingernails different colors, tucking Brian and Dexter into bed, not knowing that October was coming and everything she loved was about to be taken from her in the most violent way imaginable. And that, dear listener, is where the true story of Dexter Morgan begins. Not in a laboratory or a police station, not in a therapist's office or a courtroom. It begins with a mother who loved her sons, who trusted the wrong man to protect her, and who ran out of time on an October evening in Miami when the weather was warm and the streets were quiet and nobody was watching the shipping yard near the port. But we will come to that night gently because it is the kind of night that changes everything. And you deserve a moment to breathe before we arrive there. For now, imagine Laura Moser in the autumn of 1973, painting her youngest son's toenails because he giggled when she did it, while his older brother drew pictures at the kitchen table, and the Miami sun set orange and pink through the windows of 1235 Mangrove Drive. That is the last image of peace in this story. Hold it for a moment. Let it settle. Because what comes next will echo through 5 decades and change the lives of everyone it touches. The evening of October 2nd, 1973, began like any other in Miami. The air was humid and warm, the kind of thick Florida heat that made clothing stick to skin even after dark. Laura Moser was at home with her boys. Brian, 5 years old, was old enough to sense his mother's anxiety but too young to understand its source. Dexter, 2 years and 8 months old, understood nothing beyond the immediate world of his mother's arms and his brother's company. They were children, and children live in the present tense, unaware that the present is about to be shattered. Santos Jimenez arrived with his men. They came to Laura's house, armed and purposeful, and there was no time to run, no time to call Harry, no time to do anything except be forced at gunpoint into a vehicle with her 2 small children. The men drove them to the shipping yard near the port of Miami to a specific container, CBAN 3489, where 3 other people were already being held. These 3 were drug users who had also been marked for death by Estrada, fellow informants whose betrayals had been discovered alongside Laura's. The container was metal, industrial, the kind used to transport goods across oceans. Inside it was dark and close, the air already heavy with the breathing of terrified people. Laura held her boys as tightly as she could, whispering reassurances she did not believe, trying to keep them calm as the adults around her began to understand what was about to happen. Hector Estrada arrived. He looked at Laura and expressed his disappointment. She had betrayed him, and in his world, that was the worst thing a person could do. He did not care about her reasons, did not care that she was a mother, did not care that 2 children were watching with wide eyes from behind her legs. Business was business. Messages needed to be sent. On Estrada's orders, Santos Jimenez picked up a chainsaw. The first 3 victims were killed methodically, one at a time, while Laura and her sons watched. The sound of the chainsaw filled the metal container, amplified by the walls into something unbearable. The screaming, the blood, the absolute horror of watching human beings dismembered in a space no larger than a bedroom. Laura tried to cover her children's eyes. Brian, 5 years old, saw everything. He would never forget a single detail. When the 3 others were dead, Laura was the last one standing. She knew what was coming. She begged them not to do this in front of her babies. She screamed and cried as Santos revved the chainsaw. And then, in the final seconds of her life, Laura Moser turned to her youngest son. She smiled at him. She told him to close his eyes. She told him not to look. And the last words Dexter Moser ever heard from his mother were, "Mommy loves you, Dexter." Santos cut into her. Laura Moser died on the floor of a shipping container on October 2nd, 1973. And her 2 small sons were left sitting in 2 inches of her blood. The killers fled. They left the children alive, perhaps because even men capable of chainsaw murder drew a line at killing toddlers, or perhaps because they simply did not care enough to bother. Brian and Dexter sat in that container, surrounded by dismembered bodies and soaked in blood, for 2 days. 2 full days. Tuesday through most of Wednesday. A 5-year-old and a 2-year-old alone with the dead, in the dark, in the heat. Brian held his little brother. He did not let go. On Wednesday, police finally arrived at the shipping yard. The first officer on the scene was Detective Harry Morgan. He opened the container door, and the smell hit him before the sight did. Then he saw the carnage, the bodies, the blood, and in the middle of it all, 2 small boys, alive, staring at nothing. Harry reached in and picked up the younger child, Dexter. The boy clung to him, and as Harry lifted him, Dexter's hand slipped from Brian's grasp. Brian screamed, "Please don't leave me, Dexter!" But Harry was already carrying the smaller boy out of the container into the daylight toward his car. He ordered another officer to go back inside for Brian, but he did not go himself. He looked into Brian's eyes and later admitted he saw something broken there, something that frightened him even as a seasoned homicide detective. Harry made a choice in that moment. He took Dexter. He left Brian for the system. It was a decision that would shape the lives of both boys for decades, sending them down parallel paths toward the same destination. One brother would receive a code, a set of rules designed to channel his darkness. The other would receive nothing except a bed in a Tampa psychiatric institution and the memory of a mother's murder that played on an endless loop in his mind. The aftermath unfolded with the clinical efficiency of a justice system that had seen terrible things before. Santos Jimenez cut a deal with prosecutors, agreeing to testify against Estrada in exchange for a reduced sentence and entry into witness protection. He eventually moved to Naples, Florida, living freely while the woman he butchered rotted in a grave. Juan Pablo Aliso, the third henchman, was killed in a drug deal gone wrong before he could face justice. And Hector Estrada himself was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Harry Morgan was left holding a traumatized 2-year-old boy who had just witnessed the worst thing a human being can witness. He brought Dexter home to his wife, Doris, and his daughter, Debra, and he told them a lie. He said Dexter's parents had died in a car accident. He said the boy needed a home. He said nothing about shipping containers or chainsaws or blood. The Morgans took Dexter in, and the adoption process began, though it would not be officially completed until Dexter was 7 years old. Brian Moser was sent to a psychiatric institution in Tampa. He grew up there, with no family, no guidance, and nothing to hold on to except the memory of a brother who had been pulled from his grasp and a mother who had been killed in front of his eyes. Nobody taught Brian how to manage the impulses that the shipping container had planted inside him. Nobody gave him rules or structure or love. He simply grew, alone in a system that was not equipped to handle what he was becoming. Dexter, meanwhile, settled into the Morgan household with the adaptability of very young children. He did not remember the shipping container. The trauma had been so severe and his age so young that his mind simply sealed the memories away, burying them beneath layers of psychological protection that would hold for 30 years. As far as Dexter knew, he had always been a Morgan. Harry was his father, Doris was his mother, Debra was his sister. His past before the age of 3 simply did not exist in his conscious memory. But the damage was there. It lived in the hollow place inside him that he would later describe with painful precision. Whatever had happened in that shipping container had carved something out of young Dexter Moser and left a void that nothing could fill. He was polite, quiet, observant. He learned to mimic the emotions he saw in others because he could not generate them himself. He smiled when people expected smiles. He said the right things at the right times. He performed the role of normal child with the dedication of an actor who knows the audience is always watching. And Harry noticed, it started small. A neighbor's dog named Buddy went missing. Harry found the grave. Inside were not just Buddy's bones, but the remains of other animals as well. When confronted, young Dexter offered an explanation that was technically true, but emotionally flat. The dog's barking had kept his sick mother awake, so he killed it. The lack of remorse, the matter-of-fact delivery, the complete absence of guilt or horror at his own actions. These things told Harry Morgan something that no parent wants to know about their child. The boy he had rescued from a shipping container was becoming something dangerous. Harry Morgan sat with this knowledge for a long time, turning it over in his mind, trying to reconcile the loving father he wanted to be with the realities of what his adopted son was becoming. Doris Morgan, who was battling cancer during many of these years, saw signs as well, but could not fully process them through the fog of her illness and treatment. Debra, a couple of years younger than Dexter, saw her brother as strange but lovable, a quiet presence in a household where she provided all the noise and energy. Harry understood that Dexter's impulses were not going away. They were escalating, more animals, darker interests, a fascination with blood that went beyond curiosity into something clinical and hungry. Another parent might have turned to therapists, to institutions, to the same system that was failing Brian in Tampa. But Harry Morgan was a homicide detective. He had spent his career studying killers, understanding their patterns, cataloging their methods. And he realized something that would define the rest of his life and the rest of Dexter's. If Dexter was going to kill, and Harry believed he was, then Harry could at least teach him to do it right. Not right in a moral sense, not justified, not good, but right in a practical sense. controlled, directed, pointed at people who deserved it rather than innocents who happened to cross his path. This was the beginning of what would become known as the Code of Harry. The code was simple in its core principles, but demanding in its execution. Rule 1 was the most important and the most practical. Do not get caught. Everything else was secondary to survival, to maintaining the mask of normalcy that would allow Dexter to operate without detection. Rule 2 provided the moral framework such as it was. Only kill those who deserve it. Specifically, only kill other murderers. People who had taken innocent lives and escaped justice through technicalities, corruption, or the simple inability of the system to catch them. Harry was giving his son permission to kill, but only within boundaries that served a version of justice the courts could not deliver. The code extended beyond these two pillars into a comprehensive system of behavior: how to research a target, how to verify guilt beyond any reasonable doubt before acting, how to prepare a kill room, how to dispose of a body, how to maintain relationships, employment, and social connections that would provide alibis and deflect suspicion. Harry Morgan was teaching his adopted son to be a serial killer, and he was doing it with the thoroughness of a man who had spent decades studying what serial killers got wrong. Years later, it would be revealed that Harry had not developed the code entirely on his own. A neuropsychiatrist named Dr. Evelyn Vogel had consulted with him, providing the psychological framework that informed the code's structure. Vogel believed that Dexter represented a unique case, a person whose psychopathic tendencies could be channeled rather than cured, managed rather than eliminated. She saw him as a subject of scientific fascination as much as a child in need of guidance, and her involvement added a layer of clinical calculation to what Harry experienced as a father's desperate attempt to save his son from himself. The code was Harry's gift to Dexter, and it was also his curse. By giving Dexter rules, he gave him permission. By teaching him to kill carefully, he ensured that Dexter would kill for the rest of his life. There was no rehabilitation built into the code, no path toward eventually stopping. It was a management system, not a cure. And Harry knew this. He lived with this knowledge the way a person lives with a chronic illness, aware that it would never fully go away, hoping only that the symptoms could be controlled enough to prevent catastrophe. Dexter's adolescence passed in this strange space between normalcy and monstrosity. He attended school, got decent grades, learned to interact with peers well enough to avoid suspicion even if he could never fully connect with them. He played sports without passion, attended social events without enjoyment, dated without feeling. Every interaction was a performance, every smile rehearsed, every expression of empathy copied from observation rather than generated from within. He was, as he would later describe himself, a person who faked every human interaction and faked them very well. Debra grew up alongside him, oblivious to his true nature, but not entirely blind to his strangeness. She was loud where he was quiet, emotional where he was flat, impulsive where he was calculated. She adored him in the fierce, uncomplicated way of siblings who have shared a childhood, and Dexter, for his part, felt something for Debra that was as close to genuine affection as he was capable of producing. If there was anyone in the world he might have feelings for, he would later reflect, it would be her. Doris Morgan died of cancer during Dexter's youth, leaving Harry to raise both children alone. Her death affected Debra profoundly and Dexter barely at all, a disparity that Harry noted with the grim resignation of a man watching his predictions come true. Harry himself was deteriorating. The weight of what he had done, what he was doing, what he had created, pressed on him constantly. He had turned a traumatized child into a functional killer. He had designed a system that depended on murder to maintain its equilibrium. And he had done it all out of love or something close to love, which made the moral algebra even more impossible to solve. Harry Morgan's health declined through Dexter's teenage years, the stress and guilt manifesting as physical deterioration that doctors could treat symptomatically but never cure because the real disease was not in his body but in his conscience. By the time Dexter graduated high school and entered college to study forensic science, the Code of Harry was fully operational. Dexter understood his rules, understood his urges, and understood the narrow path between them that would define his existence. He would become a blood spatter analyst for the Miami Metro Police Department, the same department where his adoptive father had worked for decades. He would study crime scenes by day, analyzing the patterns of violence with the detached expertise of a man who understood blood intimately. And by night, he would become what Harry had made him, a killer who killed killers. And so, dear listener, as we pause here at the threshold of Dexter Morgan's adult life, take a breath. The boy from the shipping container has grown into a young man with a purpose, however dark that purpose may be. The code is in place. The mask is polished. Miami waits, with all its sunshine and shadows, ready to become the hunting ground of a predator who hides in plain sight. Rest for a moment in this space between childhood and what comes next. The 1990s are approaching, and with them Dexter Morgan's first kill. The dark passenger, as he will come to call it, is stirring. But for now, the night is quiet, and there is time to breathe before the blood begins to flow. The year is 1991. Miami is electric, dangerous, alive with color and contradiction. The skyline glitters over Biscayne Bay. The Art Deco district pulses with music from open-air clubs. Colombian drug money still flows through the city's economy like an underground river, feeding businesses and corrupting institutions in ways that nobody talks about openly, but everybody understands. The streets are loud with Spanish and English and Creole, a symphony of cultures coexisting and colliding in the subtropical heat. This is the Miami that Dexter Morgan enters as a young man, stepping into his adult life with a forensic science degree and a hunger that no degree can satisfy. At 20 years old, Dexter begins working as a forensic intern at the Miami Metro Police Department, the same building where Harry Morgan built his career, the same hallways where detectives and uniformed officers work cases that range from domestic disputes to drug cartel assassinations. Dexter walks these corridors with the quiet confidence of someone who knows he belongs, not because he loves police work in any conventional sense, but because this environment gives him access to the two things he needs more than anything else: crime scenes and information about criminals who have escaped justice. Harry Morgan is still alive during this period, still serving as Dexter's guide and conscience, still watching his adopted son with the mixture of pride and horror that has defined their relationship since Dexter was a child. Harry pushes Dexter to follow the code meticulously. Every step must be deliberate. Every potential target must be thoroughly researched. Guilt must be established beyond any shadow of doubt before Dexter is allowed to act. Harry understands that a single mistake, a single innocent person harmed, would destroy the moral architecture that keeps Dexter functioning. The code is not just a set of rules. It is the load-bearing wall that prevents Dexter's entire psychological structure from collapsing. The Miami Metro Homicide Unit in 1991 is populated by characters who will become central to Dexter's life over the next 2 decades. Captain Spencer runs the department with authority that sometimes crosses into aggression. A young Maria LaGuerta is making her presence felt, ambitious and assertive in a department that does not always welcome those qualities from women or people of color. The forensics division operates in the basement, a world of microscopes and evidence bags and chemical analysis that Dexter navigates with an ease that impresses his supervisors and unnerves nobody, because forensic scientists are expected to be a little odd, a little too interested in the mechanics of death. Dexter's first targets begin to crystallize during this period. Nurse Mary is a woman working at a medical facility who has been quietly killing patients under her care. The deaths are attributed to natural causes, to the fragility of elderly bodies, to the simple fact that people in hospitals sometimes die. But Dexter sees the pattern. His analytical mind, trained by Harry and sharpened by forensic study, identifies the anomalies that others miss. The timing of deaths, the common factor of Nurse Mary's presence, the small details that, taken individually, mean nothing but taken together, form a portrait of murder disguised as mercy. Dexter's first kill is messy, not physically because he is careful even from the beginning, but emotionally, psychologically, the experience of taking a human life for the first time is different from anything Harry's training could fully prepare him for. The dark passenger, as Dexter has been calling his urge to kill since he was about 12 years old, is satisfied in a way that nothing else in Dexter's life has ever satisfied him. The hollow place inside fills, briefly, with something that functions like fulfillment. It does not last, it never will. But in the aftermath of that first kill, Dexter understands with absolute clarity that this is who he is. Not a normal person pretending to be dangerous. A dangerous person pretending to be normal. His second significant target during this formative period is Tony Ferrer, a loan shark whose business model includes murdering clients who cannot repay their debts. Ferrer is responsible for the deaths of a mother and son from the Carballo family, killed over unpaid loans in a transaction that treated human lives as collateral damage in a financial dispute. Dexter investigates Ferrer with the thoroughness Harry demands, breaking into Ferrer's home to find a diary linking him to multiple missing persons, gathering ballistic evidence by analyzing bullets that match weapons used in previous killings. The preparation is meticulous, the execution is controlled, the code holds. Throughout this period, Dexter also begins the practice of collecting blood slides from his victims. A single drop of blood on a glass microscope slide stored in a wooden box hidden inside the air conditioning unit of his apartment. Each slide represents a kill, a trophy that satisfies a collector's impulse Dexter does not fully understand but cannot resist. The blood slides will eventually become the most dangerous evidence of his secret life, a catalog of murder hidden in plain sight in the home of a man who works with blood every day. While Dexter navigates his awakening as a killer, the past refuses to stay buried. Flashbacks to 1972 and 73 weave through this period like threads of a story that was never fully told. Harry and Laura Moser meeting in parks and interview rooms, conducting their affair alongside their professional arrangement. Laura wearing a wire to meetings with Estrada's associates, terrified but determined. Santos Jimenez watching from a distance, cataloging the evidence that will seal Laura's fate. The audience watches knowing what is coming, and the dramatic irony is almost unbearable. Brian Moser, Dexter's older brother, exists during this period as a ghost in the narrative. Growing up in the Tampa Psychiatric Institution, Brian has been shaped by the same trauma that shaped Dexter, but without any of the support structures Harry provided. No code, no guidance, no father figure to channel the rage and the hunger into something that at least approximates control. Brian remembers everything about the shipping container, the sounds, the smell, his mother's final words, and he remembers his little brother being carried away by a stranger while he screamed for Dexter not to leave him. That memory is the seed from which Brian's entire adult psychology grows, twisted by abandonment and silence into something that will eventually bring him back to Miami with murder in his heart and a plan to find the brother who was stolen from him. Debra Morgan is a teenager during this period, already developing the fierce personality that will define her. She is loud, profane, emotionally unfiltered in ways that Dexter finds both confusing and admirable. She does not know that her brother is a killer. She does not know that he was adopted under false pretenses. She does not know that Harry's careful fatherhood is actually a management system designed to prevent Dexter from becoming a headline. She sees him as her quiet, weird, lovable older brother, and she loves him without reservation. That love will be tested in ways neither of them can imagine, but in 1991, it is simply a fact of their shared life, unremarkable and essential. Harry Morgan's health continues to decline. The burden of what he has done weighs on him physically and emotionally. He watches Dexter make his first kills with the complicated feelings of a man watching a controlled demolition that he himself designed. The building is coming down as planned, but the destruction is still destruction. Harry had hoped, perhaps naively, that teaching Dexter the code would somehow make the killing tolerable. Instead, it has simply made it more efficient, and Harry must live with the knowledge that efficiency in killing is not the same thing as virtue. The forensics lab becomes Dexter's sanctuary during these early years. Surrounded by microscopes and chemical reagents, analyzing bloodstain patterns and fiber samples, he finds a peace in the work that resembles what other people feel in meditation or prayer. Blood tells stories to Dexter. The way it splatters reveals the angle and force of an impact. The way it pools reveals the position of a body. The way it dries reveals the passage of time. Every crime scene is a puzzle written in red, and Dexter reads these puzzles with a fluency that his colleagues respect and sometimes envy. They think he is dedicated. They think he is passionate about forensic science. They do not think about why a man would be so deeply, intimately comfortable with blood, because to think about that question would be to arrive at an answer nobody wants to hear. By the end of 1991, Dexter Morgan has transitioned from potential to practice. The code of Harry is no longer theoretical. It has been tested and it works. Dexter can identify targets, verify their guilt, plan their capture, execute the kill, and dispose of the evidence with a methodical discipline that would impress any project manager in any industry if the project in question were not serial murder. He has learned to wrap his kill rooms in plastic sheeting, to use surgical tools for precision, to transport bodies to his boat and dump them in the waters off Miami, weighted and wrapped and consigned to the deep where the Gulf Stream carries secrets away from shore. And somewhere in Tampa, Brian Moser is growing up too. He is learning his own lessons, developing his own skills, nurturing his own hunger. Without the code to guide him, Brian's kills will be different from Dexter's. More theatrical, more personal, driven not by a sense of justice, however distorted, but by a need to recreate and re-experience the trauma that made him what he is. He will leave his victims bloodless, a deliberate inversion of the shipping container where blood covered everything. He will dismember them with surgical precision, echoing the chainsaw that dismembered his mother. And eventually, he will come to Miami to find his brother, to show him what they really are, to propose a partnership built on shared trauma and shared darkness. But that reunion is still years away. For now, in the warm Miami nights of 1991, Dexter Morgan drives home from his latest kill, disposes of his tools, showers the evidence away, and prepares for another day at the office. He is 20 years old. He has his entire career ahead of him. And the dark passenger, settled and content after feeding, lets him sleep. Take a breath here, dear listener. The 1990s will pass for Dexter in a rhythm of work and killing that becomes almost routine. He refines his methods, he builds his collection of blood slides, he maintains his mask with increasing sophistication. By the time we next meet him, it will be 2006, and a new killer will have arrived in Miami whose methods will shake Dexter's understanding of himself to its foundations. But that story can wait. For now, let the quiet of this pause settle around you. The Miami night is warm, the ocean is close, and Dexter Morgan is for the moment at peace. The years between 1991 and 2006 pass for Dexter Morgan in a carefully maintained routine that would bore anyone who did not know what lay beneath it. He rises each morning, goes to the Miami Metro Police Department, analyzes blood spatter evidence at crime scenes, files reports, attends meetings, and interacts with colleagues who regard him as a somewhat eccentric but likable member of the team. He brings donuts. He makes small talk. He remembers birthdays. Every gesture is calculated to reinforce the impression of normalcy that protects his secret life. At night, when the need arises, he becomes something else entirely. The process is ritualistic. He identifies a target, someone who has committed murder and escaped justice. He researches obsessively, confirming guilt through methods that would satisfy any court if courts could know about them. He prepares the kill room, covering the space in plastic sheeting, laying out his tools with surgical precision. He captures the target, renders them unconscious with a syringe of animal tranquilizer, and secures them to a table wrapped in plastic. When they wake, Dexter is there, wearing a dark Henley shirt and a practiced calm, showing them photographs of their victims before ending their lives. He takes a blood sample on a glass slide, adds it to his collection, dismembers the body, wraps the pieces in garbage bags, takes them out on his boat, the Slice of Life, and deposits them in the waters of the Gulf Stream off the coast of Miami. It is a rhythm as steady as breathing, and it sustains him the way food sustains other people. During these years, Dexter enters a relationship with a woman named Rita Bennett. Rita is a damaged person herself, having survived years of marriage to Paul Bennett, a violently abusive man who eventually went to prison for drug offenses. Rita has 2 children from that marriage, Astor and Cody, and she approaches new relationships with the caution of someone who has been badly hurt and cannot afford to be hurt again. Dexter is attracted to her precisely because of this damage. Her reluctance to push too hard, her willingness to accept surface-level interaction, her gratitude for basic kindness, all of these qualities make her an ideal partner for a man who can provide the appearance of love without the substance. They date cautiously, slowly, building something that Rita believes is a genuine relationship, and Dexter understands is a performance. But something unexpected happens over time. Dexter finds that he cares about Rita, not in the overwhelming, all-consuming way that other people describe love, but in a quiet, practical way that surprises him. He cares about her comfort. He cares about her safety. He cares about Aster and Cody in the way that a man who was once a lost child himself might care about children who need stability. It is not love as the world defines it, but it is something, and for Dexter, something is more than he ever expected to feel. Debra Morgan has followed her father into law enforcement, joining the Miami Metro Police Department as a uniformed officer and working her way toward the homicide division with the determination and colorful language that define everything she does. She is good at her job. She is passionate about justice in a way that Dexter can admire even if he cannot share. And she remains completely unaware that her brother, the quiet forensic analyst who brings donuts and avoids confrontation, is a serial killer whose body count already numbers in the dozens. The man who creates the most friction in Dexter's professional life is Sergeant James Dokes. Unlike everyone else at Miami Metro, Dokes is not fooled by Dexter's mask. He cannot articulate what is wrong with the blood spatter analyst, cannot point to specific evidence of wrongdoing, but his instincts scream that something is deeply off. He watches Dexter constantly, confronts him in hallways, calls him names that cut closer to the truth than Dokes realizes. Creep. Freak. There's something off about you, Morgan. Dokes is the only person in Dexter's daily life who sees through the performance, and his suspicion creates a constant low-level threat that Dexter must navigate with care. By the autumn of 2006, Dexter Morgan is 35 years old. He has been killing for 15 years. His blood slide collection has grown into a carefully maintained archive of death, hidden in the air conditioning unit of his apartment on Bay Harbor Islands. He is settled in his routine, confident in his methods, satisfied with a life that provides everything the dark passenger requires. Miami Metro keeps him close to the information he needs. Rita keeps up the appearance of normal relationship. Debra keeps him connected to something that resembles family. The Code of Harry keeps him focused on targets who deserve what they get. And then a killer arrives in Miami who changes everything. In October of 2006, bodies begin appearing across the city. Women, dismembered, drained of blood, left in public places with a theatrical precision that suggests intelligence and planning. The victims are sex workers, women who exist on the margins of society, whose disappearances might go unnoticed by a system that does not always value their lives. But the killer is not hiding. He is displaying. Each body is positioned with care, each scene staged to communicate something specific to someone specific. The press begins covering the murders, the police mobilize their resources. And Dexter Morgan sits at his desk analyzing blood spatter evidence, feeling something he has not felt in a long time. Excitement. The killer is talking to him. The case that unfolds through the final months of 2006 will become known as the Ice Truck Killer Investigation, named for the refrigeration methods the murderer uses to preserve his victims' body parts. The killings are bloodless, a detail that strikes Dexter with particular force because his own work always involves blood, always centers on the substance that defines his professional and personal life. Whoever this killer is, he has found a way to remove every drop of blood from his victims before display, an inversion of everything Dexter knows and practices. The investigation draws Dexter into a personal obsession that goes beyond professional interest. He analyzes the crime scenes with intensity that his colleagues attribute to dedication, but which actually stems from recognition. This killer understands him. The staged scenes contain messages designed for someone with specific knowledge, specific experiences, specific memories. The hotel room at the Marina View Hotel, room 103, is drenched in blood from 5 different victims. And when Dexter enters it, he collapses. The sight triggers flashbacks he has never experienced before. Images of himself as a small child sitting in blood, images of a woman being killed, images of a shipping container. The memories he buried at age 2 begin forcing their way through 30 years of psychological concrete. Debra is working the case from her position in Vice, desperate to prove herself worthy of a transfer to homicide. She encounters a man named Rudy Cooper, a prosthetic specialist, who is charming, attentive, and deeply interested in her. Their relationship develops quickly, Rudy providing the emotional support and romantic attention that Debra has been craving. He asks about her family, about Dexter specifically, with an interest she interprets as caring but which serves a different purpose entirely. Because Rudy Cooper is Brian Moser, Dexter's biological brother, the 5-year-old who watched their mother die in a shipping container, has been living under an assumed name, building a career in prosthetics that gives him access to surgical tools and anatomical knowledge, and planning a reunion with the little brother who was taken from him 33 years ago. The ice truck killer murders are not random acts of violence. They are invitations. Each crime scene contains details that reference the shipping container, that echo Laura Moser's murder, that are designed to awaken Dexter's suppressed memories and lead him back to his true identity. Brian's plan is elegant in its cruelty. By dating Debra, he places himself inside Dexter's life, close enough to observe and manipulate. By staging murders that reference their shared past, he provokes Dexter's memories and destabilizes his carefully constructed identity. And when the time is right, he intends to reveal himself, to show Dexter the truth about who they are, and to propose that they kill together as brothers, starting with the adoptive sister who represents everything Harry Morgan gave to Dexter and everything the system denied to Brian. The truth emerges in fragments. Dexter discovers that his biological mother was a woman named Laura Moser. He learns about the shipping container massacre. He reads the police files that Harry kept hidden for decades. He discovers he has a brother, Brian, who was separated from him after the trauma. And gradually, through a combination of forensic investigation and personal revelation, he identifies Rudy Cooper as Brian Moser, the ice truck killer. Brian kidnaps Debra. He takes her to the house on Moorhead Street where their mother once lived, a property that has been abandoned since Laura's death. He drugs Debra, binds her, and waits for Dexter. When Dexter arrives, Brian reveals everything. He shows Dexter the shipping container where they both suffered. He explains their shared history. He proposes that they kill Debra together, eliminating the symbol of Harry's favoritism and beginning a new chapter as brothers, united by blood and murder. Dexter stands at a crossroads that defines his character for the rest of the story. Blood family or chosen family, the brother who shares his trauma or the sister who shares his life. Brian offers understanding, offers acceptance of who Dexter really is, offers a partnership that requires no masks and no pretending. Debra offers love, imperfect and unknowing, the only genuine emotional connection Dexter has ever experienced. Dexter chooses Debra. He kills Brian. He stages the scene to look like a suicide, ensuring that the ice truck killer investigation concludes with a closed case rather than a scandal that would expose Dexter's biological history. The Miami Metro Police Department accepts the resolution, the public moves on, and Dexter is left with the knowledge that he has murdered his own brother to protect his adopted sister, that the shipping container's legacy has claimed another victim, and that the hollow place inside him is, if anything, deeper than before. James Dokes watches from the periphery, suspicious as ever, unable to prove anything but certain that Dexter Morgan is not what he appears to be. "I've got my eye on you, Morgan," he says, and he means it with every fiber of his being. He is right about Dexter. He has always been right. But being right and being able to prove it are different things, and Dokes will learn that the distance between those two things can be measured in lives. Settle deeper, dear listener. The ice truck killer is gone, but Miami is not done with Dexter Morgan. The years that follow will bring investigations that threaten to expose his secret, relationships that test his capacity for feeling, and a villain so terrifying that Dexter himself will be afraid. But those stories will unfold at their own pace, carried by the gentle current of this voice, as the night grows deeper and sleep draws closer. Rest here for a moment. Breathe. The blood has been washed away, and the morning light of 2007 is approaching. 2007 brought danger to Dexter Morgan's doorstep in the form of his own past. For years, he had been disposing of his victims' remains in the waters off Miami, wrapping dismembered body parts in garbage bags and sinking them in a stretch of ocean near the Bay Harbor Marina. It was a method that Harry had helped him develop, reliable and discreet. The bags weighted and dropped in waters deep enough that recovery seemed impossible. But the ocean keeps its own counsel, and on a day that began like any other, a group of recreational divers discovered the bags on the ocean floor. One diver pulled a bag to the surface. Inside were human remains. The discovery triggered an investigation that would threaten everything Dexter had built. The FBI assigned Special Agent Frank Lundy to lead the case. Lundy was everything Dexter feared in an investigator: patient, methodical, brilliant, and possessed of an instinct for human behavior that made him dangerous to anyone with secrets. He established a task force dubbed the Unknown Killer the Bay Harbor Butcher and began the slow, meticulous process of building a profile. The Butcher, Lundy determined, was likely someone with law enforcement connections, someone who understood forensic procedures, someone who could identify criminals who had escaped justice and eliminate them without leaving evidence. The profile pointed in a direction that made everyone at Miami Metro uncomfortable because it suggested the killer was one of their own. Dexter's anxiety during this period was unlike anything he had experienced. The code's first rule, don't get caught, was under direct threat. Every day brought new evidence, new leads, new investigators examining crime scenes that Dexter himself had created. He attended meetings where his own kills were discussed, offering analysis of his own blood spatter work, pointing investigators toward dead ends while appearing to be a diligent member of the team. It was the ultimate performance, and the stakes were his life. Sergeant James Dokes escalated his surveillance of Dexter during this period, following him on his own time, documenting his movements, building an unofficial case based on instinct rather than evidence. Dokes had always believed Dexter was hiding something. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation crystallized his suspicion into certainty. He began following Dexter to the marina, tracking his boat trips, and eventually confronted him directly with accusations that Dexter deflected with practiced calm but increasing desperation. The confrontation came to a head when Dokes discovered Dexter at a crime scene that was not a Miami Metro case. A kill room, Dexter's kill room, the plastic sheeting, the tools, the bound victim. Dokes finally had the evidence he needed, but Dexter was faster. He captured Dokes, imprisoned him in a remote cabin in the Everglades, and faced the most difficult decision of his killing career. Dokes was not a murderer, he was a good cop, maybe the only cop who had ever truly seen Dexter for what he was. Killing him would violate the code. Keeping him alive risked exposure. The decision was taken from Dexter's hands by Lila West, a woman he had become involved with during this period. Lila was a British artist whose passion and intensity had drawn Dexter into a toxic affair after he joined a Narcotics Anonymous group as a cover story for his secret life. Lila was possessive, obsessive, and capable of violence that she disguised as passion. When she discovered Dokes in the cabin, she made her own calculation. She detonated the cabin with Dokes inside, killing him and destroying the evidence of Dexter's activities in a single act of arson. The explosion served a double purpose. With Dokes dead and evidence of Dexter's kill tools destroyed in the fire, the FBI concluded that Dokes himself was the Bay Harbor Butcher. The case was closed. The dead man took the blame. Dexter was free, but the freedom tasted wrong. An innocent man had died to protect his secret, and although Dexter had not pulled the trigger, he had created the conditions that made Dokes' death inevitable. The code had bent, if not quite broken, and the crack would widen with time. Dexter killed Lila in Paris. She had fled to Europe after the cabin explosion, and Dexter followed, understanding that her knowledge of his activities made her a permanent threat. He found her in a Parisian apartment and ended her life with the same clinical efficiency he applied to all his work. It was the first time he had killed someone in a foreign country, and the logistics were different, but the result was the same. Another slide for the collection, another secret buried. 2008 brought a new complication in the form of Miguel Prado. Prado was an ambitious assistant district attorney in Miami, the kind of man who saw the legal system as a mechanism for advancing his career rather than serving justice. When Dexter accidentally killed Miguel's brother Oscar during a planned kill that went sideways, the two men were drawn into each other's orbits. Miguel discovered Dexter's secret, and instead of recoiling in horror, he was fascinated. He wanted partnership. He wanted to join Dexter in the work of eliminating criminals who had escaped justice, and he brought the resources of the DA's office to the table, providing intelligence and access that Dexter could never obtain on his own. The partnership was seductive. For the first time in his life, Dexter had someone who knew what he was and accepted it, someone who wanted to participate rather than run away. But Miguel Prado was not bound by the code of Harry. His definition of deserving expanded rapidly from genuine criminals to personal enemies, political rivals, anyone who stood between Miguel and his ambitions. He used Dexter's methods to eliminate a woman whose only crime was opposing one of his development projects, and Dexter realized with sickening clarity that sharing his secret with someone who lacked the code was worse than keeping it alone. Dexter killed Miguel and framed another criminal for the murder. The friendship, such as it was, ended the way all of Dexter's relationships with people who knew his truth eventually ended, in death and deception. But the experience taught him something valuable. The code existed not just to protect Dexter from the world, but to protect the world from what Dexter could become without it. During the same year, Rita discovered she was pregnant with Dexter's child. The news created a crisis that had nothing to do with murder and everything to do with identity. Dexter Morgan, a man who had spent his entire life believing he was incapable of genuine human connection, was about to become a father. He proposed to Rita, partly out of obligation and partly out of something he could not quite name. Something that might have been hope. If he could be a father, if he could build a family, if he could participate in the normal human experience of raising a child, then perhaps the hollow place inside could be filled by something other than killing. Rita said yes, they married. And Dexter entered the next chapter of his life with a wife, 2 stepchildren, and a baby on the way, trying to believe that domesticity and murder could coexist in the same life without one eventually destroying the other. Harrison Morgan was born in 2009, and Dexter held his son for the first time with hands that had held knives and needles and plastic wrap. The baby was small and warm and alive in a way that made Dexter's world feel simultaneously more precious and more dangerous. Everything he did from this point forward would carry the additional weight of fatherhood, the knowledge that his choices affected not just himself but a child who depended on him completely. The birth of Harrison coincided with the arrival of Arthur Mitchell in Dexter's awareness. Arthur was a man in his 60s, distinguished, community-minded, a regular volunteer with a charitable organization called 4 Walls, 1 Heart that built homes for disadvantaged families. He was a church deacon, a devoted husband and father, the kind of man communities celebrate at banquets and name buildings after. He was also the Trinity killer, one of the most prolific serial killers in American history, who had been murdering in a precise 3-kill cycle across the country for over 30 years. Trinity's method was specific and ritualistic. In each city he visited, he killed 3 people in a pattern that never varied. First, a young woman in a bathtub, forced to slit her wrists while Arthur watched and recited comforting words. Second, a middle-aged woman beaten to death in her home. Third, a middle-aged man forced to jump from a great height. Each kill recreated a trauma from Arthur's past, a cycle of violence that he repeated compulsively in city after city, decade after decade, leaving bodies across the country that investigators could not connect because the kills seemed unrelated and the killer moved constantly. Dexter was fascinated by Arthur Mitchell in a way that transcended his usual predatory interest. Here was a man who had maintained a functioning family life for decades while simultaneously being a serial killer. Arthur had a wife, children, a home, a reputation. He had achieved the very thing Dexter was now attempting with Rita and Harrison, the integration of murder and domesticity into a single, sustainable life. Dexter wanted to learn from him before killing him, to study how Arthur balanced his dark needs with his family obligations, to extract the secret of coexistence before ending Arthur's life. This decision to delay was the most consequential mistake Dexter Morgan ever made. Dexter embedded himself in Arthur's world, joining the 4 Walls, 1 Heart organization and building a relationship with the older man under a false identity. He observed Arthur's family dynamics, which were deeply disturbing beneath their surface normality. Arthur's wife lived in fear. His son was emotionally abused. His daughter was controlled and isolated. The perfect family man was actually a tyrant whose charitable public image masked a household built on intimidation and violence. The lesson Dexter should have learned was that maintaining a family while being a killer does not produce happiness. It produces victims who happen to share your last name. But Dexter was distracted by the demands of his own family life. Rita needed him present, Harrison needed care. Astor and Cody required the attention of a stepfather who was constantly absent. The juggling act grew more precarious with each passing week, and Dexter's focus split between tracking Arthur and maintaining the domestic obligations that kept his cover intact. Miami Metro's investigation of the Trinity killings progressed in parallel. The team discovered that Arthur's pattern included a fourth kill that had gone unrecognized for decades. Before each cycle's bathtub murder, a 10-year-old boy went missing. These abductions, occurring 5 days before the first acknowledged kill, had been invisible to investigators because they happened in different jurisdictions and were never connected to the subsequent murders. The discovery expanded Trinity's known victim count dramatically and revealed the full scope of his depravity. He was not killing 3 people per cycle, he was killing 4, starting with a child. Debra contributed to the investigation with her characteristic intensity, interviewing a survivor of one of Arthur's abductions, a man named Scott Smith who had been taken as a boy and held for days before being released. The investigation narrowed on 4 walls, 1 heart, identifying the organization as the common thread connecting Trinity cities. Arthur Mitchell's name appeared on volunteer lists nationwide. Arthur, meanwhile, discovered Dexter's true identity. He found the Morgan household, he learned about Rita, he learned about Harrison, and he understood that the young man who had been studying him was not an admirer but a predator, a fellow killer who intended to end his decades-long career. Arthur Mitchell responded the way a cornered animal responds, with the most devastating attack available to him. On the night of the Season 4 finale, Dexter killed Arthur Mitchell. He captured him, prepared him according to the code, and ended the Trinity killer's 30-year career in a kill room that represented the culmination of a season-long pursuit. Dexter believed for a few brief hours that he had protected his family and eliminated the threat. Then he went home. Rita Morgan was found in the bathtub. She had been killed by Arthur Mitchell before Dexter could reach him, murdered in the same ritualistic fashion that Arthur used for the first victim of each cycle. The bathtub was filled with water turned pink by blood. And sitting on the bathroom floor, in a pool of his mother's blood, was Harrison Morgan, an infant, staring at nothing, exactly as Dexter had once sat in his own mother's blood in a shipping container 36 years earlier. The symmetry was devastating. 2 boys, 2 pools of blood, 2 lives shattered before they had truly begun. Harry Morgan had pulled Dexter from a shipping container and tried to save him through a code of rules that channeled his darkness. Now Dexter stood in his own bathroom, looking at his own son, wondering whether the cycle he had been trying to break had instead been duplicated with horrifying precision. Rita was dead. The woman who had trusted Dexter, who had believed in the life they were building, who had never known the truth about the man she married, was dead because Dexter had delayed killing Arthur Mitchell in order to learn from him. The lesson Arthur ultimately taught was the cruelest one possible, that trying to balance murder and family does not elevate the murderer, it endangers the family. The season ended with Dexter Morgan standing in his bathroom, covered in the aftermath of his greatest failure, while his infant son sat in blood that would mark him the way Laura Moser's blood had marked Dexter decades earlier. The dark passenger had no comfort to offer. The code had no rule for this. There was only the hollow place inside, wider now than it had ever been. And the understanding that everything Dexter had tried to build was a lie that Arthur Mitchell had exposed with a single act of violence. Let this moment rest, dear listener. It is the heaviest part of our story so far, and you may feel the weight of it pressing down like a blanket. But heavy things can also hold you still, can anchor you to your bed and pull you deeper into sleep. The worst of what happened to Rita Morgan has been told, and we can carry it together as we move forward into the years that follow. The night is deep now, and the story continues, but the pace will be gentle. Breathe. Let the tension slowly release from your shoulders and your jaw. There are more chapters to come, and they will carry us further into Dexter's world. But for now, this moment of quiet is yours. The years that followed Rita's death tested Dexter Morgan in ways that the Code of Harry never anticipated. Grief, or whatever approximation of grief a man like Dexter could experience, settled over him like fog over the Everglades, thick and disorienting and difficult to see through. He was a single father now, responsible for an infant son, 2 stepchildren, and the maintenance of a normal life that had always been performance, but was now performance without an audience. Rita was gone. The person who had believed in the illusion most completely was dead, and the illusion itself felt hollow without someone to believe in it. 2010 brought Dexter a companion in darkness. Lumen Pierce was a young woman who had survived a horrifying ordeal, kidnapped and brutalized by a group of wealthy, influential men who treated the rape and murder of women as recreation. Lumen had been one of many victims, but she was the one who survived, escaping with physical and psychological scars that conventional recovery could not address. When Dexter encountered her, he recognized something familiar in her eyes. The same emptiness he carried, the same hunger for resolution that the justice system could not provide. They formed a partnership that was part therapy and part vengeance. Together, they identified and hunted the members of the ring that had tortured Lumen, tracking them through Miami's social networks, using Dexter's skills and Lumen's willingness to confront the men who had destroyed her. The kills were different from Dexter's usual solitary work. They were collaborative, purposeful in a way that went beyond the code's mandate. They were, for both participants, acts of healing through violence, the kind of contradictory human behavior that no psychiatrist would endorse, but that produced undeniable results. Debra, now a detective in the homicide division, investigated the vigilante killings without knowing her brother was responsible. She came close enough to identification that Dexter felt the familiar pressure of near exposure, but ultimately she chose to let the vigilantes go, recognizing that the victims were monsters who had escaped justice and that their killer, whoever it was, had performed a service the system had failed to provide. It was a moral compromise that foreshadowed larger compromises to come. Lumen's partnership with Dexter ended peacefully, a rarity in his life. After the last member of the ring was killed, Lumen's dark passenger, as Dexter understood it, simply vanished. The need that had driven her to kill was gone, resolved through the completion of her mission. She left Miami with gratitude and something like affection, and Dexter watched her go with the understanding that his own dark passenger would never leave so quietly. His was permanent. Hers had been temporary. The difference between them was the difference between being damaged by a single event and being forged by it. A corrupt police officer named Stan Liddy had been investigating Dexter during this period, hired by Quinn, who harbored his own suspicions about the blood spatter analyst. Liddy gathered evidence of Dexter's activities but was killed before he could present his findings. His death another brick in the wall of bodies that protected Dexter's secret. Quinn's investigation collapsed without Liddy's evidence, and another person who had come too close to the truth was silenced by circumstance, if not by Dexter's direct hand. 2011 introduced a case that pushed Dexter into unfamiliar psychological territory. A series of ritualistic murders appeared across Miami, crime scenes staged with elaborate religious symbolism drawn from the Book of Revelation. Bodies displayed in tableaus depicting apocalyptic imagery, doomsday warnings painted in blood, the kind of theatrical violence that demanded attention and interpretation. The killer, or killers, seemed to be building toward something, a grand statement about the end of the world that used human suffering as its medium. The investigation revealed two apparent perpetrators, Travis Marshall, a young man consumed by religious fervor, and Professor James Geller, a theology professor whose academic obsession with apocalyptic texts had apparently evolved into a desire to manifest them in reality. Travis and Geller worked together, or so it appeared, staging their kills with the precision of artists and the conviction of true believers. The twist, when it came, reframed everything. Professor Geller was dead. He had been dead for some time, murdered by Travis himself. The partnership that the investigation had assumed was actually a hallucination, Travis's fractured mind projecting Geller as an external figure directing his actions when in reality Travis was acting alone, talking to a dead man, receiving instructions from a voice inside his own head. The parallel to Dexter's own relationship with Harry's ghost, the internal voice that guided him through moments of decision, was uncomfortably precise. Dexter saw in Travis a distorted reflection of his own psychology, a killer who justified his actions through the voice of an authority figure that existed only in his mind. Dexter killed Travis in a church, the kind of poetic justice that the dark passenger appreciated even if the code had no particular interest in symbolism. He strapped Travis to a table, prepared his tools, and ended the Doomsday Killer's apocalyptic ambitions with the same methodical efficiency he applied to every kill. But this time, something unprecedented happened. Debra walked in. She entered the church. At the exact moment Dexter plunged his knife into Travis Marshall's chest. She saw everything. The kill room, the plastic, the body, her brother standing over a dead man with a weapon in his hand, surrounded by the unmistakable apparatus of serial murder. The mask that Dexter had maintained for his entire adult life shattered in a single instant, and Debra Morgan finally knew what her brother really was. The revelation destroyed their relationship and rebuilt it into something unrecognizable. Debra's initial reaction was horror, then denial, then a desperate attempt to control the situation. She demanded that Dexter stop killing. She tried to monitor his behavior, to redirect his urges toward conventional outlets, to pretend that what she had seen could be managed through willpower and good intentions. When these efforts failed, as they inevitably did, she was forced to confront the reality that Dexter could not stop killing any more than he could stop breathing. The dark passenger was not a habit, it was a fundamental aspect of his identity. 2012 unfolded under the weight of Debra's knowledge. She became complicit in Dexter's activities, not by choice, but by the impossibility of reconciling what she knew with what the law required. She could report her brother and destroy their family. She could remain silent and become an accessory to murder. There was no option that preserved both her integrity and her relationship with Dexter, and so she chose the relationship, hating herself for it, hating him for forcing the choice, and hating the world for creating a situation where love and law could not coexist. During this year, Dexter encountered Hannah McKay. Hannah was a woman whose beauty was matched by her lethality, a killer who used poison rather than force, who had murdered multiple people with a calm that rivaled Dexter's own. Unlike previous romantic interests, Hannah was not a victim and not a civilian. She was a predator, a fellow traveler on the dark road that Dexter walked, and their relationship developed with the intensity of two people who see themselves reflected in each other's worst qualities. Dexter fell in love with Hannah, or something so close to love that the distinction ceased to matter. She understood him without explanation. She accepted his nature without flinching. She offered the possibility of a partnership that Rita could never have provided, a union of two people who operated outside conventional morality and found in each other the connection that normal relationships had always denied them. The relationship complicated everything. Pulling Dexter between his loyalty to Debra and his desire for Hannah, between the code's demands and his heart's demands, between the life he had built and the life he wanted. The Ukrainian Koshka Brotherhood provided the season's external threat, a criminal organization led by Isaac Serko, whose personal vendetta against Dexter created danger on multiple fronts. Serko was not a typical antagonist. He was intelligent, empathetic, and motivated by genuine love for a partner Dexter had killed. The confrontation between them was personal rather than ideological, a battle between two men who understood violence intimately but disagreed about its application. Lieutenant Maria LaGuerta became the most dangerous threat Dexter had ever faced during this period. LaGuerta had always been ambitious, political, willing to use the system for personal advancement. But she was also a detective and a good one, and when she found evidence suggesting the Bay Harbor butcher was still active, she pursued it with the same tenacity she applied to every case that could advance her career. She reopened the butcher investigation, reviewed evidence that had been accepted as conclusive, and identified inconsistencies that pointed away from the dead Sergeant Dokes and towards someone still alive and working at Miami Metro. Her investigation narrowed on Dexter. She gathered evidence, obtained warrants, tracked his movements, and built a case that threatened to expose everything he had spent decades hiding. LaGuerta's pursuit was not motivated by justice alone. She wanted vindication, wanted to prove that she had been right to question the original investigation's conclusions, wanted the career boost that would come from solving the biggest unsolved case in Miami Metro history. But her motivations did not diminish the danger she represented. The season's climax occurred on New Year's Eve, 2012. Dexter lured Hector Estrada, the drug lord who had ordered his mother's murder, and who had been released from prison, to the same shipping yard where Laura Moser died. The plan was to use Estrada as bait, drawing LaGuerta to the location where Dexter could frame the encounter as a confrontation between LaGuerta and Estrada that ended in mutual violence. The plan was cold, calculated, and required Dexter to kill a woman whose only crime was being a good enough detective to figure out what he was. Debra arrived at the shipping yard before the plan could be executed cleanly. She found Dexter standing over a drugged Lagerta, knife in hand, about to commit a murder that would violate the code in its most fundamental sense. LaGuerta was not a killer, she was a police officer doing her job. Killing her would cross a line that Harry Morgan had drawn in the bedrock of Dexter's psychology. LaGuerta woke. She saw Debra. She ordered her to shoot Dexter, telling her she was a good person, appealing to the conscience that Dexter lacked. Dexter agreed. He dropped his knife and told Debra, "Do what you gotta do." And Debra Morgan, the woman who represented everything good that the Morgan family had produced, the sister who had loved Dexter unconditionally for decades, raised her weapon and shot Maria Lagerta, not Dexter, LaGuerta. Debra chose her brother over her duty, over her morality, over everything she had believed about herself. She killed an innocent woman to protect a guilty man, and the act shattered her in ways that would never fully heal. The shipping yard, the same location where Laura Moser had been murdered 40 years earlier, claimed another victim, and the cycle of violence that connected the Morgan family continued its terrible rotation. 2013 was the final year of Dexter Morgan's life in Miami, though he did not know this when it began. A neuropsychiatrist named Dr. Evelyn Vogel arrived, claiming a connection to Harry Morgan that predated Dexter's adoption. Vogel revealed that she had helped Harry develop the Code of Harry, providing the psychological framework that shaped Dexter's entire existence. She had studied young Dexter, assessed his psychopathology, and collaborated with Harry on the system of rules that channeled his impulses towards socially useful targets. The revelation reframed Dexter's origin story, adding a layer of clinical manipulation to what he had experienced as paternal love. Vogel's presence introduced a new serial killer, the brain surgeon, whose methods involved removing portions of victims' brains with surgical precision. The brain surgeon's identity and motivations unfolded through the season, eventually connecting to Vogel's past and the broader history of the Code's creation. Dexter's plan during this final year in Miami was to leave. He intended to take Harrison and flee to Argentina with Hannah McKay, escaping the accumulated danger of decades of killing in a single city and starting over in a place where nobody knew his name or his history. The plan represented something new for Dexter, not just survival, but the possibility of a life with someone who understood him, in a place where the past could not follow. The plan failed. The brain surgeon shot Debra. The bullet did not kill her immediately, but it caused a blood clot that led to a stroke in the hospital, leaving her brain dead on a ventilator, breathing but gone, her body functioning while her mind had already departed. Dexter stood at his sister's bedside and understood that everything he had tried to protect her from had eventually caught her anyway. His secret life, his kills, his choices, the chain of consequences that stretched back to the shipping container, all of it had converged on this hospital room where the person he loved most was being kept alive by machines. Dexter disconnected Debra from life support. He carried her body to his boat, the Slice of Life, wrapped in a white sheet that billowed in the ocean wind like a sail or a surrender flag. He drove the boat into the waters off Miami, the same waters where he had disposed of dozens of victims over the years, and he committed his sister's body to the deep. Not as a victim, as a farewell. Then Dexter Morgan drove his boat directly into Hurricane Laura. The storm had been named for his mother, a coincidence so precise that it felt like the universe had designed it specifically for this moment. He aimed the Slice of Life into the hurricane's approaching wall of wind and water, and the boat was destroyed. The Coast Guard found wreckage. They did not find a body. Dexter Morgan was declared dead, killed in a hurricane while distraught over his sister's death. The Bay Harbor butcher case was closed permanently. The blood slides, the kill rooms, the plastic wrap, the decades of careful murder, all of it disappeared beneath the narrative of a man who had lost too much and made a final, desperate decision. But Dexter Morgan was not dead. The final moments of the original series revealed him alive, living in a remote location that appeared to be the Pacific Northwest, working as a lumberjack. He had a beard. He lived alone in a small, bare room. He looked into the camera with empty eyes, and the show ended without resolution, without justice, without the satisfaction of a story properly concluded. For 8 years, that was the ending. Dexter Morgan, alive, alone, in exile, having abandoned his son, Harrison, to Hannah McKay's care, having faked his death to escape the consequences of a lifetime of killing. It was an ending that frustrated millions of viewers who had followed the show since 2006, an ending that felt unfinished, unsatisfying, a question mark where a period should have been. But the story was not over. It was only sleeping. Let the image of Dexter in his lumberjack exile carry you deeper, dear listener. The man who spent his adult life surrounded by the heat and color of Miami now sits in cold silence, far from the ocean, far from his son, far from everything he knew. The dark passenger is still there, still hungry, still whispering. But Dexter has chosen to starve it, to sit with the emptiness rather than fill it with blood. For how long? That question floated in the air for 8 years, unanswered, while the world moved on and the character of Dexter Morgan lived in memory and reruns, and the quiet hope of fans who believed the story deserved more. It did deserve more, and more was coming, but not yet, not quite yet. First, the silence, the cold, the years of nothing. And then, like a crack forming in ice on a winter lake, the smallest sound of something breaking open. 8 years passed, 8 years in which Dexter Morgan did not exist, not publicly, not officially, not in any record or database or memory that the world maintained about the living. He was a dead man walking through a life that belonged to someone else. The name on his identification was Jim Lindsay. The town was Iron Lake, a small community in upstate New York surrounded by forests and cold and the kind of quiet that makes Miami feel like another planet. He worked at a fish and game store owned by a man named Fred, selling hunting supplies and outdoor equipment to locals who knew him as a friendly, slightly reserved guy who had settled in Iron Lake a few years back and never caused any trouble. The transformation from Dexter Morgan to Jim Lindsay required the kind of discipline that only the Code of Harry could produce. Dexter had suppressed his killing urges for nearly a decade. No victims, no plastic wrap, no blood slides, no midnight boat trips into the waters off whatever coast was nearest. He had simply stopped the way an addict stops, through daily acts of will that were invisible to everyone except the person performing them. The dark passenger was still there, still present in the background of his consciousness, still hungry. But Dexter had chosen to starve it, and for 8 years the starvation held. Iron Lake was everything Miami was not, small where Miami was sprawling, cold where Miami was hot, white and rural where Miami was diverse and urban. The community operated on familiarity and trust, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's name and strangers were noticed immediately. Dexter navigated this environment with the same social skills he had honed in Miami, performing the role of Jim Lindsay, with the same practiced ease he had once performed the role of Dexter Morgan, normal guy. He befriended the local police chief, Angela Bishop, and eventually began a romantic relationship with her that provided the appearance of normality he required. Angela was a good cop and a complicated person. She had adopted her daughter Audrey after the girl's birth. Mother abandoned her, a detail that resonated with Dexter's own experience of adoption, though he could never share that connection without revealing his true identity. Angela carried her own burden, a lifelong obsession with the disappearance of her childhood best friend, Iris, who had vanished decades earlier without explanation. The mystery of Iris haunted Angela the way the shipping container haunted Dexter, a foundational trauma that shaped everything that came after. The ghost that accompanied Dexter through his Iron Lake exile was not Harry Morgan, it was Debra. His dead sister appeared in his mind's eye, speaking with the same profane intensity she had displayed in life, but now serving as his internal critic rather than his conscience. Where Harry had been measured and strategic, offering guidance that balanced Dexter's dark impulses against the need for self-preservation, Debra was confrontational and accusatory. She reminded Dexter of his failures, of the people who had died because of him, of the moral compromises that had destroyed her own life. She was punishment rather than guidance, and Dexter accepted her presence because he believed he deserved punishment. Harrison Morgan arrived in Iron Lake in late 2021. He was a teenager, tall and troubled, carrying a letter that Dexter had written to Hannah McKay years earlier, containing instructions to contact him if Harrison showed any dark tendencies. The letter was a confession wrapped in a warning, an acknowledgement that the shipping container's legacy might have passed to another generation. that the blood in the bathtub where Harrison sat as an infant might have planted the same seeds that the shipping container planted in Dexter. Harrison's arrival forced Dexter to confront everything he had been running from. His son was standing in front of him, asking questions that Dexter could not answer without revealing the truth he had spent decades hiding. "Why did you leave? What was wrong with me that you faked your death and abandoned me?" Harrison had grown up believing his father was dead, raised by Hannah McKay until her own death from cancer, then shuffled through foster homes where he experienced the kind of instability and casual cruelty that forges hard edges on soft children. He had come to Iron Lake not for a reunion but for answers, and he was prepared to leave if the answers were not good enough. Dexter lied initially. He told Harrison a version of events that omitted the most important details, framing his departure as an act of love rather than an act of cowardice. He said he left because of what he was, not what Harrison was. He said he feared passing on his darkness. He said everything a father in that situation might say, and Harrison accepted it tentatively, agreeing to stay in Iron Lake for a while, to see if the relationship could be rebuilt in a place where both of them were starting over. The dark passenger, dormant for 8 years, awakened almost immediately upon Harrison's arrival. The trigger was a man named Matt Caldwell, the son of Kurt Caldwell, a wealthy trucking magnate who was arguably the most respected person in Iron Lake. Matt was a reckless, entitled bully who killed a beloved white deer in the woods near Dexter's cabin, shooting the animal with the casual cruelty of someone who views the natural world as his personal target range. The deer's death, witnessed by Dexter, flipped a switch that 8 years of discipline could not hold shut. The dark passenger surged forward, and Dexter killed Matt Caldwell in the woods behind his cabin. The kill was different from Dexter's Miami operations, less precise, more urgent. The years of abstinence had dulled his skills and sharpened his desperation, creating a combination that produced a messier result than the code demanded. He dismembered Matt's body and hid the pieces under a fire pit on his property, a temporary solution that became permanent when a search party organized by Kurt Caldwell set up camp in his yard, cooking breakfast over the fire pit that concealed his son's remains. The irony was grotesque. Kurt Caldwell, the grieving father organizing the search for his missing son, stood feet away from the dismembered body he was searching for, completely unaware. And Dexter, the man who had killed Matt, participated in the search, offering assistance and sympathy, while internally managing the logistics of a cover-up that grew more precarious with each passing day. Kurt Caldwell was not the innocent victim he appeared to be. Beneath his community pillar exterior, Kurt had been operating as a serial killer for 25 years. His method was specific and ritualistic. He befriended young women passing through Iron Lake, often hitchhikers or runaways with no strong connections, women whose disappearance would not generate sustained investigation. He offered them shelter in a cabin on his property, made them feel safe, and then hunted them through the surrounding woods, shooting them with a rifle in a twisted recreation of the deer hunts that defined rural upstate culture. After killing them, he preserved their bodies in a bunker beneath his cabin, embalming them and displaying them in glass cases like trophies. The bunker contained dozens of victims, a museum of murder that stretched back decades, including the remains of Angela Bishop's childhood friend, Iris. Dexter discovered Kurt's true nature through investigation that paralleled his Miami Metro methods, following evidence trails and connecting patterns that others missed. The discovery created an impossible situation. Dexter had killed Kurt's innocent son, but Kurt himself was a monster whose crimes dwarfed anything Matt had done. The moral calculus of the Code of Harry, which demanded that only murderers be killed, was satisfied by Kurt's guilt. But the practical implications of killing the father of the man he had already murdered created complications that the Code had never anticipated. A forensic investigator from Albany named Damian Church arrived in Iron Lake to process the crime scene where Matt was last seen. Despite an initially clumsy appearance, Damian proved to be highly competent, identifying human blood mixed with the deer's blood at the location where Dexter had killed Matt. The investigation tightened around Dexter, and his efforts to stay ahead of the evidence consumed increasing amounts of time and energy. Harrison began exhibiting behavior that confirmed Dexter's worst fears. The boy had dark impulses of his own. He hurt a classmate during a wrestling match, applying excessive force with a detachment that his coach and principal found disturbing. He displayed a fascination with violence that went beyond normal teenage aggression, and he told Dexter in a conversation that cut to the bone that he knew something was wrong with him, that he had always known, that he needed his father to tell him what it meant. Dexter faced the same choice Harry Morgan had faced decades earlier. Tell Harrison the truth about his nature, provide a framework for managing impulses that could not be eliminated, and accept the responsibility of creating another controlled killer. Or lie, deny, and hope that ignorance would protect his son from a destiny that Dexter understood better than anyone alive. He chose a version of truth. He told Harrison about the dark passenger. He told him about the code. He began the process of teaching his son the rules that Harry had taught him, passing the generational inheritance forward with the same mixture of love and horror that Harry had experienced. The cycle was repeating, and Dexter could not determine whether that was a tragedy or a necessity. Kurt Caldwell escalated his conflict with Dexter, burning down his cabin and threatening the people he cared about. Dexter killed Kurt in his own cabin, ending the 25-year killing spree and adding another slide to a collection he had begun maintaining again after years of abstinence. He showed Harrison what he had done, trying to teach the boy that killing could be directed at those who deserved it, that the darkness inside did not have to be random or cruel. Angela Bishop's investigation proved to be the most dangerous threat Dexter faced in Iron Lake. A true crime podcaster named Molly Park Wyking, who had been researching cases connected to the Bay Harbor butcher, shared information with Angela that linked Jim Lindsay to Dexter Morgan. Angela discovered that the quiet shopkeeper she had been dating was a supposedly dead serial killer from Miami. She connected the dots between Dexter's methods and the deaths of people in Iron Lake, identifying the injection marks and drugs that were consistent with both his past and present activities. Angela called Angel Batista, a detective from Miami Metro who had worked alongside Dexter for years, and told him that Dexter Morgan was alive. Batista was shocked but immediately recognized the implications. He prepared to travel to Iron Lake with evidence from the Bay Harbor butcher case, evidence that could lead to Dexter's extradition to Florida, where the death penalty applied. Dexter was arrested. For the first time in his life, he sat in a jail cell, charged with murder, facing the possibility that the code's first and most important rule had finally been broken. He would be caught. He was caught. And everything he had built, every mask he had worn, every relationship he had maintained was disintegrating around him. In his cell, Dexter made a desperate decision. When Sergeant Logan, the good-natured local cop who had befriended Harrison and served as assistant wrestling coach at the high school, brought him water, Dexter attacked. He grabbed Logan through the bars, pulled him close, and demanded the keys to his cell. Logan, instead of surrendering, reached for his gun. He fired backward through the bars, missing Dexter, who responded by snapping Logan's neck with a single violent motion. Logan was not a killer. He was not a criminal. He was a good man doing his job, and Dexter killed him to escape. The code of Harry, the framework that had governed Dexter's entire killing career, was shattered. Rule 2 demanded that Dexter only kill those who deserved it. Logan deserved nothing except a long life and a retirement party. His death was not justice, it was survival at its most animal and desperate. Dexter called Harrison from Logan's phone, told him to gather his things, and arranged a meeting at a spot in the woods where they had once watched a white deer together. He arrived with Logan's blood still on him, and Harrison's first question was about that blood. Whose was it? What had happened? When Harrison learned that Dexter had killed Logan, the fragile structure of their renewed relationship collapsed entirely. Harrison had believed his father killed only bad people. He had accepted the dark passenger as something that could be managed, directed, controlled by a code that gave it purpose and limits. Logan's death proved that the code was a fiction, that when survival demanded it, Dexter would kill anyone. Harrison confronted his father with a question that contained the entire moral weight of the Dexter Morgan story. Would Mom and Deb be alive if it weren't for you? The question needed no answer because they both knew the truth. Rita was dead because Dexter's lifestyle attracted predators who targeted his family. Debra was dead because protecting Dexter's secret had destroyed her life and ultimately her body. Everyone who had ever been close to Dexter Morgan had suffered for it, and the pattern would continue as long as he was alive. Dexter understood. In the cold light of a New York winter, standing in the woods with his son, he understood that the cycle would not stop voluntarily. The dark passenger would always demand feeding. The code would always bend when survival required it. And the people Dexter loved would always be endangered by his proximity. The only way to break the cycle was to end it, permanently. He told Harrison to take the safety off his rifle. He told him it was the only way. He told Harrison to shoot him in the heart. And Harrison, the son who had come to Iron Lake looking for answers, who had found his father and lost him again in the space of a few weeks, who carried his own darkness but also carried something Dexter never had, the ability to choose differently, pulled the trigger. Dexter Morgan collapsed in the snow. With his final breath, he looked at his son and said, "You did good." The ghost of Debra appeared beside him, took his hand for a moment, and then pulled away as the life left his body. The dark passenger fell silent at last. Angela Bishop arrived at the scene and found Harrison standing over his father's body. She ordered him to drop the rifle. He fell to his knees and confessed that he killed Dexter because Dexter had murdered Logan. Angela looked at the boy, at the dead man on the ground, at the rifle in the snow, and she made a decision that came from the same place where mercy and exhaustion meet. She wiped down the rifle, reported the shooting as her own, gave Harrison cash, and told him to leave Iron Lake and never come back. Harrison drove away in Dexter's truck, past Logan's body being carried from the police station, past Audrey's house where she stood in the window without knowing he was watching, past the edges of a town that would remember Jim Lindsay as the man Angela Bishop had to shoot and never know the rest. On the seat beside him was a bag of money that Kurt Caldwell had hidden, and in his pocket was the letter Dexter had written to Hannah, the letter that had brought him to Iron Lake in the first place. The story of Dexter Morgan appeared to be over. A man born in blood had died in snow. A father who had been saved from a shipping container had been killed by the son he could not save from himself. The dark passenger had been silenced by a bullet, and the code of Harry had died with the man it was written for. But stories that involve Dexter Morgan have never been good at staying finished. Rest here, dear listener. This is a place where the story seems to end, where the night is at its darkest, and the silence is at its deepest. You have traveled through decades of Dexter's life, from a shipping container in 1973 to a snowy clearing in 2021. If sleep has found you, let it hold you. If you are still listening, know that there is more to tell, but it can wait. The night is patient, and so is the story. Breathe deeply. Let the quiet of Iron Lake settle around you like fresh snowfall. The next chapter will come when you are ready for it. Dexter Morgan did not die in Iron Lake. The bullet that Harrison fired struck Dexter in the chest, and by every reasonable estimation, it should have been fatal. He collapsed in the snow. His heart stopped. His breathing ceased. To anyone watching, including Harrison, including the ghost of Debra that flickered out of existence as his consciousness faded, Dexter Morgan was dead. But the emergency medical response in Iron Lake, though small, was functional. An ambulance arrived. Paramedics worked on his body with the desperate urgency they applied to every patient, unaware that the man on their stretcher had killed more people than they would encounter in a lifetime of emergency calls. They restored his heartbeat. They stabilized his breathing. They transported him to a hospital where surgeons operated through the night, repairing the damage that Harrison's rifle had inflicted on his father's chest. The bullet had missed his heart by a margin so narrow that the surgeons later described it as miraculous. Dexter Morgan survived because the universe, or chance, or whatever force governs the boundary between life and death, was not finished with him. He entered a coma. For 10 weeks, Dexter Morgan lay in a hospital bed, breathing through a ventilator monitored by machines that beeped and hummed in the rhythm of artificial life. His body healed while his mind existed somewhere beyond consciousness, in a space where the dark passenger and the ghost of Harry Morgan and the memory of every person he had ever killed occupied the same formless darkness. Whether he dreamed during those 10 weeks and what those dreams contained is something only Dexter could describe. And when he finally woke, he did not speak of them. When his eyes opened, the first thing Dexter Morgan registered was that he was alive. The second thing he registered was that Harrison was gone. His son had left Iron Lake, had disappeared into the vastness of America, and no one at the hospital could tell Dexter where he had gone. The boy who had shot his father and been told he did good had taken the money, the letter, and the truck, and he had vanished. Dexter's survival could not remain secret for long. Angela Bishop had reported the shooting as her own. But the narrative she constructed depended on Dexter being dead. A living Dexter Morgan complicated everything, especially when Angel Batista arrived from Miami with questions about the Bay Harbor butcher, and a decades-old suspicion that had never been fully resolved. Batista's presence in Iron Lake and his discovery that Dexter was alive set in motion a chain of events that would follow Dexter to his next destination, New York City. Dexter tracked Harrison to Manhattan following the kind of leads that his forensic training made him uniquely qualified to pursue. Harrison had relocated to the city, found work as a bellhop at the Empire Hotel, and was attempting to build a normal life in a place large enough to disappear in. He was struggling. The guilt of shooting his father, the uncertainty about whether that father was alive or dead, the dark impulses that continued to surface despite his efforts to suppress them, all of these things weighed on Harrison in ways that New York's anonymity could not alleviate. Dexter arrived in the city with nothing except determination and the need to find his son. He had no money, no identification that would survive scrutiny, and no support network. He was a dead man in a city of 8 million people, and the only person he wanted to find was someone who might not want to be found. The adjustment from Iron Lake's rural quiet to Manhattan's overwhelming density was jarring, but Dexter adapted with the facility of someone who had been performing different versions of himself for decades. Jim Lindsay was retired, Dexter Morgan was legally dead. The person walking the streets of New York was someone new, someone still forming, someone searching for purpose in the gap between who he had been and who he might become. He found work as a rideshare driver, a job that provided income and mobility without requiring documentation that could be traced. Through this work, he befriended Blessing Kamara, a fellow driver whose warmth and generosity provided Dexter with something he had not experienced in years: a genuine human connection. Blessing offered Dexter a place to stay, introduced him to the rhythms of a community that operated beneath the notice of mainstream New York, and demonstrated through her own life that kindness could exist in difficult circumstances without requiring a code or a kill room to sustain it. The ghost that accompanied Dexter through New York was Harry Morgan. After years of Debra's accusatory presence in Iron Lake, Harry's return as Dexter's internal voice represented a shift in his psychological landscape. Harry's ghost was the original conscience, the voice of the code, the father who had tried to contain Dexter's darkness through rules and discipline. His return suggested that Dexter was reaching back toward the fundamentals of his identity, revisiting the foundation that Harry had built when Dexter was a child, trying to determine whether the code could be rebuilt, modified, or finally transcended. Harrison's life in New York was harder than his father imagined. The Empire Hotel provided employment and structure, but Harrison carried psychological baggage that no job could resolve. He had dark impulses that surfaced unpredictably, triggered by encounters with violence and injustice that New York supplied in abundance. He feared himself, feared what he was capable of, feared that the darkness his father had described was growing inside him without the constraints that Dexter's code had provided. He was, in many ways, where Dexter had been as a teenager, aware of something wrong inside himself but lacking the tools to manage it. Angel Batista followed the trail from Iron Lake to New York. The former captain of Miami Metro Homicide had spent years as Dexter's colleague, had considered Dexter a friend, and had never suspected the truth until Angela Bishop's phone call shattered every assumption he had ever made about the quiet bloodspatter analyst. Batista arrived in New York with evidence and questions, determined to resolve the Bay Harbor butcher case once and for all. His presence created constant pressure on Dexter, forcing him to navigate the city while staying ahead of an investigation led by someone who knew his face, his habits, and his professional methods. The city introduced Dexter to a world of organized darkness that made his solitary operations in Miami look almost quaint. Leon Prater was a billionaire venture capitalist whose wealth provided the resources and insulation to pursue interests that went far beyond the financial. Prater ran a secret society of serial killers, a curated network of wealthy and influential people who killed recreationally and protected each other through mutual blackmail and shared resources. The society operated in the shadows of New York's elite social structures, its members attending the same charity galas and art openings as the city's most prominent citizens, while maintaining private lives that would horrify those same citizens if exposed. Prater saw in Dexter Morgan something rare, a killer of extraordinary skill and experience who operated alone and had survived decades without capture. He wanted to recruit Dexter, to add him to a collection that included individuals like Mia LaPierre, known within the society as Lady Vengeance, whose method and motivation Dexter found both familiar and disturbing. The society offered resources, protection, and companionship of a kind that Dexter had experienced only briefly with Miguel Prado and Lumen Pierce. It offered, in other words, everything the dark passenger had ever wanted. Charlie Brown, Prater's head of security, served as the interface between Prater's world and Dexter's. She was intelligent, dangerous, and loyal to Prater in ways that suggested a relationship more complex than employer and employee. Her presence added another layer of threat and possibility to Dexter's already complicated situation in New York. The dynamic between Dexter and Harrison in New York was different from their brief relationship in Iron Lake. The bullet that Harrison had fired created a gravity between them that could not be ignored or pretended away. They had tried to kill each other and failed. They shared darkness that neither could discuss with anyone else. And they were, despite everything, father and son, connected by biology and trauma, and the same restless hunger that neither could fully explain or permanently satisfy. Dexter attempted something he had never genuinely tried before. He tried to be a father not by teaching the code, but by being present. By stepping up when Harrison needed support, by redirecting his own energy toward protection rather than predation. The attempt was imperfect, compromised by the circumstances of their lives and the unavoidable reality that Dexter Morgan would always be a serial killer, regardless of how many rules he imposed on himself. But the attempt itself represented growth, a willingness to try a different approach after decades of following the same script. Batista's investigation progressed, connecting the Bay Harbor butcher case to recent events in New York and building a theory that threatened to expose Dexter's entire history. A journalist named Claudette began digging into Miami Metro's past, uncovering connections and contradictions that the original investigation had buried or overlooked. The walls were closing in from multiple directions, and Dexter's ability to outmaneuver law enforcement, which had protected him for decades, was being tested by investigators who had learned from the mistakes of their predecessors. Prater's revelation that he knew critical information about Dexter forced a confrontation that escalated through the season's final episodes. The billionaire's resources and connections made him a different kind of antagonist from any Dexter had faced previously. This was not a single killer operating in the shadows. This was an organization with wealth, influence, and the willingness to destroy anyone who threatened its existence. Dexter found himself not just hunting, but being hunted. Not just protecting his secret, but fighting for his life and Harrison's life against enemies who operated at a level of sophistication that the Trinity killer or the ice truck killer could never have matched. The first season of Dexter's Resurrection concluded in September of 2025, with a confrontation that forced both Dexter and Harrison to face the consequences of their darkness. The details of that confrontation are better experienced than summarized, but the emotional core of the resolution centered on the question that had driven the entire franchise from its first episode. Can a man who kills be something more than a killer? Can the hollow place inside be filled by love, by family, by purpose, by anything other than blood? The answer, as always with Dexter Morgan, was complicated. The series was renewed for a second season, expected to arrive in the fall of 2026, coinciding with the 20th anniversary of the original show's premiere on Showtime in October of 2006. The announcement confirmed that Dexter's story was not finished, that the dark passenger had more road to travel, and that the cycle of violence, redemption, and relapse that had defined the character for 2 decades would continue to spin. And so, dear listener, we arrive at the present. The year is 2026, and Dexter Morgan is alive. He is in New York City, navigating a world that has changed enormously since he first walked the corridors of Miami Metro as a young forensic intern in 1991. He has lost everyone he loved: Rita, Debra, Harry, his mother Laura, his brother Brian, and found the only person who might understand him fully, his son Harrison, who carries the same darkness and the same potential for something beyond darkness. The timeline we have traveled together stretches over 50 years, from Laura Moser's birth in Bannon, North Carolina in 1946 to Dexter's birth in Miami in 1971. From the shipping container massacre of October 1973 to the Code of Harry developed in the years that followed. From the first kill in 1991 to the ice truck killer in 2006. From the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation to the Trinity killer's devastating revenge. From Debra's discovery to Lagerta's death. From the hurricane that was supposed to be the end to the lumberjack exile that was really a pause. From Iron Lake's cold silence to Harrison's bullet to the resurrection that brought Dexter back to a world that believed he was gone. Through all of it, certain themes recur like heartbeats. Blood, the substance that defines Dexter's professional life and his secret one, the medium through which he reads crime scenes and creates them. Water, the ocean where he dumped his victims, the hurricane he drove into, the bathtub where Rita died and where Harrison sat in her blood, fathers and sons, Harry and Dexter, Dexter and Harrison, the transmission of darkness through generations, the hope that each generation might learn to carry it differently. The mask, the performance of normalcy that Dexter maintained for decades, the smile that hid the void, the donuts and small talk and birthday cards that constructed a false identity so convincing that even the people closest to him never suspected the truth, and the dark passenger itself. That phrase, which Dexter coined when he was about 12 years old, for the force inside him that demanded blood and could not be reasoned with or eliminated, only managed. Harry told him the dark passenger was not real, that it was just a feeling, that calling it something separate was a way of avoiding responsibility for his own choices. Hannah McKay said the same thing. And maybe they were right. Maybe the dark passenger was never an entity or a force or a supernatural presence. Maybe it was just Dexter all along, choosing to kill and calling the choice by another name to make it bearable. The beauty of the story, the thing that has kept audiences watching through 8 seasons and 3 additional series, is that the question is never definitively answered. Dexter Morgan is both monster and man, both killer and father, both predator and protector. He is the worst person in almost any room he enters, and also, paradoxically, the person most committed to a version of justice that the legal system cannot provide. He is the character who forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about morality, about nature versus nurture, about whether a person who does terrible things can also be, in some meaningful way, good. These are not questions for tonight, dear listener. Tonight is for rest. You have traveled an extraordinary distance through an extraordinary story, from a small town in North Carolina to the streets of New York City, from 1946 to 2026, through blood and darkness, and the occasional flicker of something that might have been light. The journey is complete, or at least this chapter of it is complete. The Dexter franchise continues. A second season of Resurrection has been ordered, with filming set to begin in spring of 2026. A prequel focusing on the Trinity killer's origins has been announced. The world of Dexter Morgan keeps expanding, keeps finding new stories to tell within the framework that the original series established. There will be more to say, more timelines to follow, more darkness to explore. But that is for future nights and future storytelling sessions. For now, imagine Dexter Morgan at rest, not the lumberjack in the cold, not the blood spatter analyst at his desk, not the killer in his plastic-wrapped room. Just a man, sitting somewhere quiet, perhaps by a window, perhaps looking out at a city that never sleeps. The dark passenger is quiet. Harrison is safe, or as safe as anyone in that family can be. The night is deep, and the story, for now, is told. This journey through the entire Dexter timeline began with a mother who loved her sons, and ended with a son who loved his father enough to pull the trigger, and a father who loved his son enough to tell him it was the right thing to do. Between those two acts of love and violence lies everything we have covered tonight: the shipping container, the code, the ice truck killer, the Bay Harbor butcher, the Trinity killer, Debra's discovery, Lagerta's death, the hurricane, the exile, Iron Lake, the bullet, the coma, New York City, and always, always, always the blood. Dexter Morgan once said, "My name is Dexter Morgan. I don't know what made me the way I am, but whatever it was left a hollow place inside. People fake a lot of human interactions, but I feel like I fake them all, and I fake them very well. And that's my burden, I guess. Sweet dreams, dear listener. May your sleep be deep and undisturbed, free of dark passengers and shipping containers, and the complicated mathematics of who deserves what in a world that rarely provides clear answers. May you wake rested, refreshed, and grateful for a life that does not require a code to navigate. The story of Dexter Morgan will be here when you return, unchanged and waiting, patient as the dark passenger itself. The night is yours now. Rest well, you have earned it. And yet, before sleep takes you completely, let us linger a moment longer in the world we have built tonight. Because the story of Dexter Morgan is not just the story of a fictional serial killer, it is the story of a television show that changed the way audiences thought about anti-heroes, about morality, about the line between the people we root for and the people we should fear. The show premiered on October 1st, 2006 on Showtime, a premium cable network that allowed the kind of graphic content and moral complexity that broadcast television could not touch. Michael C. Hall, who had previously been known for his role as a repressed funeral director on 6 Feet Under, stepped into the role of Dexter Morgan and transformed himself into something audiences had never quite experienced. A serial killer they liked, a murderer they cheered for, a monster who made them laugh, who made them care, who made them uncomfortable with how much they wanted him to succeed. The show's genius was in its structure. Each season introduced a new antagonist, a fellow traveler on the dark road that Dexter walked, someone whose methods or motivations forced Dexter to confront different aspects of his own nature. The ice truck killer was family. The Bay Harbor butcher investigation was exposure. Miguel Prado was partnership. The Trinity killer was the impossible dream of having it all. Each season asked a different question, and each season's answer was written in blood. Jennifer Carpenter brought Debra Morgan to life with a ferocity that made her one of television's most beloved characters. Debra's profanity was legendary, her emotional range extraordinary, her evolution from ambitious beat cop to compromised accessory to murder, one of the most heartbreaking arcs in the show's history. When Debra discovered Dexter's secret at the end of season 6, the show transformed from a thriller about a hidden killer into a tragedy about two siblings destroying each other with love. The supporting cast created a world around Dexter that felt lived in and authentic. David Zayas as Angel Batista, the warm-hearted detective whose decency served as contrast to Dexter's emptiness. C.S. Lee as Vince Masuka, the forensics colleague whose crude humor provided comic relief in a show that desperately needed it. Lauren Velez as Maria Laguerta, whose ambition and intelligence made her the most persistent threat to Dexter's freedom until her death at the end of season 7. Eric King as James Dokes, whose suspicion of Dexter was the show's first and best exploration of what happens when someone sees through the mask. The show was filmed primarily in and around Los Angeles, with locations in Long Beach, California, standing in for the pastel streets and waterfront neighborhoods of Miami. Early first-season establishing shots utilized authentic Miami locations, but the production settled into its California home quickly, creating a version of Miami that was more aesthetically consistent than geographically accurate. The pilot production was affected by Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma during filming, an early sign that this show would carry a certain intensity even behind the cameras. Michael C. Hall's performance anchored everything. His salary began at $295,000 per episode for the first 6 seasons and climbed to $830,000 per episode for the final 2, a figure that reflected both the show's success and Hall's irreplaceable contribution to it. His voiceover narration, delivered in Dexter's calm, analytical tone while describing acts of violence and emotional disconnection, became one of the most distinctive elements of 21st century television. The voice was seductive precisely because it was calm, drawing viewers into Dexter's perspective so thoroughly that they forgot, at least temporarily, that they were listening to a serial killer rationalize murder. The show's visual style evolved across its run. Season 1 was shot on 35mm film, giving it a saturated, gritty texture that matched the darkness of its subject matter. Subsequent seasons transitioned to digital formats, creating a cleaner look that some fans preferred and others missed. The bright, sun-drenched Miami aesthetic served as constant counterpoint to the show's dark content, a visual reminder that terrible things can happen in beautiful places, that evil does not announce itself with gray skies and thunderstorms, but operates just as comfortably beneath blue skies and palm trees. The original series finale, which aired on September 22, 2013, was among the most controversial endings in television history. The lumberjack reveal, as fans came to call it, provoked widespread frustration and disappointment. After 8 seasons of investment in Dexter's story, audiences felt that the character deserved a definitive conclusion, whether that meant death, arrest, or some other form of accountability. Instead, they received an image of Dexter alive and alone, staring into the camera with an expression that communicated nothing and resolved nothing. The finale's critical reception was so negative that it became a cultural reference point for disappointing series endings, mentioned alongside the finales of other beloved shows that failed to stick the landing. The desire for a better ending drove the creation of Dexter: New Blood, which premiered on November 7, 2021, 8 years after the original finale. The limited series was designed explicitly as a second chance, an opportunity to give Dexter Morgan the conclusion his story deserved. Set in the fictional town of Iron Lake, New York, and filmed primarily in the real-world village of Shelburne Falls in Franklin County, Massachusetts, New Blood transported Dexter from the heat of Miami to the cold of upstate New York, using the seasonal change as visual metaphor for the character's attempted transformation. New Blood's ending, in which Harrison shot and killed his father, was received with more respect than the lumberjack finale, but still generated significant debate. Some viewers found it a fitting conclusion. The cycle of violence ended by the next generation's refusal to perpetuate it. Others felt it was too abrupt, too final, too eager to provide the definitive ending that the original series had denied. The debate became moot when Dexter Resurrection was announced, revealing that the gunshot had not been fatal and that Dexter's story would continue once more. Dexter: Original Sin, the prequel series set in 1991, premiered in December of 2024 with Patrick Gibson stepping into the role of young Dexter and Christian Slater portraying Harry Morgan. The series explored the foundational period of Dexter's killing career, depicting his transition from forensic intern to active predator under Harry's guidance. The show utilized a framing device in which the adult Dexter, voiced by Michael C. Hall, narrated from the perspective of someone reflecting on their origins after a near-death experience, tying the prequel directly to the events of Resurrection. Original Sin was canceled in August of 2025 despite an earlier renewal announcement, making its single season a self-contained chapter in the broader franchise. Dexter: Resurrection premiered on Paramount Plus with Showtime on July 11, 2025, bringing Michael C. Hall back to the role that had defined his career. The series moved the action to New York City for the first time in the franchise's history, creating visual contrast with both Miami's tropical glamour and Iron Lake's rural isolation. The addition of Uma Thurman and Peter Dinklage to the cast signaled the franchise's ambition to expand beyond its established formula, introducing characters and conflicts that operated at a scale Dexter had never previously encountered. The critical response to Resurrection was overwhelmingly positive, with the show earning a 95% rating on Rotten Tomatoes for its first season. Reviewers praised the return to form, comparing it favorably to the show's peak during the Trinity killer arc. The renewal for a second season, announced in October of 2025, confirmed that the franchise had regained the creative momentum it had lost during the original series' final seasons. A Trinity killer prequel series has also been announced, focusing on the early life and first murders of Arthur Mitchell in the 1970s. The expansion of the Dexter universe into prequel territory suggests a franchise strategy that will continue to explore the origins and implications of its central themes for years to come. The Dexter franchise, taken as a whole, represents one of the most sustained examinations of moral ambiguity in popular entertainment. Across 8 original seasons, 3 spin-off series, and counting, the story has asked its audience to sit with discomfort, to root for someone they know they should not root for, to examine their own assumptions about justice and punishment and the difference between monsters and men. It has done this through compelling characters, sharp writing, and performances that elevate pulpy premises into genuine art. And it has done this, most importantly, by never providing easy answers. Dexter Morgan is not redeemed, He is not punished definitively. He is not explained away by psychology or circumstance. He simply is what he is, a man shaped by trauma into something that society cannot accommodate, who finds meaning in violence the way others find meaning in love or work or faith. Whether that makes him sympathetic or repulsive depends entirely on the viewer, and the show's greatest achievement is making both responses equally valid. Now, truly, let the story rest. The television has been turned off. The streaming service has gone dark. The screen shows nothing but the faint reflection of your own face in the glass. Dexter Morgan exists now only in your memory and in the vast archive of episodes that will be there whenever you want to return. The dark passenger sleeps when you sleep, and tonight there is nothing to fear from it. Close your eyes if you have not already. Feel the weight of the blankets, the softness of the pillow, the gentle pull of gravity holding you exactly where you are. The story has been told. Every timeline has been walked. Every character has been met and understood and released back into the fiction from which they came. Tomorrow the world will be bright and ordinary, full of the small concerns and quiet pleasures that make up a life lived without a code, without a dark passenger, without the burden of secrets that can never be spoken aloud. Tomorrow is for the living. Tonight is for sleep. Good night, dear listener. Thank you for traveling with me through the shadows. May every night that follows be as peaceful as this one, and may the only blood you ever encounter be the fictional kind, safely contained within the boundaries of a story that cannot hurt you. Sleep well, the story is finished, the night is yours. One last thing before the darkness takes you fully. Consider in this final drowsy moment the geography we have covered tonight. We began in Bannon, North Carolina, a small town where a girl named Laura Moser grew up dreaming of something bigger. We traveled to Miami, where the sun bakes the sidewalks and the ocean stretches to the horizon, where Art Deco buildings glow pink and turquoise at sunset, where the port handles cargo that arrives in shipping containers that nobody walks past with a second thought. We spent decades in that city, moving through its neighborhoods, its police stations, its marinas, its suburban homes, where Rita Bennett hung curtains and Harrison Morgan took his first steps. We visited the Everglades, where Dokes met his end in a cabin that Lila West burned to the ground. We stood on the deck of the Slice of Life as it moved through dark waters toward the dumping ground where Dexter released his secrets into the Gulf Stream. We sat in the living room where Rita and Dexter tried to build something normal while the dark passenger paced behind his eyes. We sat in a hospital waiting room while surgeons worked on a man who had been shot by his own son. Then we left Miami behind, traveling north through the humid corridor of Florida, past the Georgia pines, through the Carolinas where Laura Moser was born, up through the mid-Atlantic states and into New York, where the landscape changes from flat coastal plain to rolling hills to the Adirondack foothills where Iron Lake sits in its pocket of cold and quiet. We walked the streets of that small town, past Fred's Fish and Game, past the tavern where everyone gathered, past the high school where Harrison tried to be normal, past the police station where Angela Bishop kept watch over a community she loved. We stood in the snow where Dexter fell, and we waited while an ambulance screamed through the frozen night toward a man who was not yet finished dying. And finally, we came to New York City. Manhattan, the island that compresses more human experience into fewer square miles than anywhere else on Earth. The avenues that stretch north to south like ruled lines on a page. The cross streets that cut east to west like the bars of a cage or the rungs of a ladder, depending on your perspective. The steam rising from grates in the winter. The sound of traffic that never stops, a permanent white noise that makes silence feel unnatural. The Empire Hotel where Harrison carried luggage and opened doors and tried to outrun a heritage that followed him through revolving doors and down marble hallways. The apartment where Blessing Camera offered Dexter a room and a kindness that required nothing in return. The underground spaces where Leon Prater gathered his collection of killers and called it society. This is the world of Dexter Morgan, sprawling and specific, sunny and dark, populated by people whose ordinary lives intersect with extraordinary violence in ways they do not always recognize until it is too late. It is a world built on the foundation of a single question that was first asked in a shipping container in 1973, when a 2-year-old boy sat in his mother's blood and something inside him changed forever. What happens to a child who sees the worst thing a human being can do to another human being? What grows in the space where innocence used to live? And can whatever grows there ever be shaped into something that resembles, however imperfectly, a life worth living? The show says yes, and the show says no. And the show says the question itself might be more important than the answer, because asking it requires us to look at ourselves, at our own dark passengers, at the impulses we manage and the masks we wear and the performances we deliver every day in the ongoing theater of being a person in the world. We are all, in our smaller and less lethal ways, doing what Dexter Morgan does, performing normalcy, managing impulses, hoping the mask holds. The difference, of course, is that our masks are not hiding murder. Our dark passengers are garden variety anxieties and regrets, not homicidal urges requiring a code to contain. But the mechanism is the same: the smile we offer when we feel nothing, the interest we feign when we are bored, the composure we maintain when we are falling apart. Dexter Morgan, for all his monstrousness, holds a mirror up to the human experience of living behind a face that does not always reflect what lies beneath. That is why his story resonates. That is why millions of people have followed it for 20 years, through good seasons and bad, through satisfying conclusions and infuriating ones, through prequels and sequels and resurrections that would be implausible in any other franchise but feel inevitable in this one. Because Dexter Morgan's story is, at its core, a story about the gap between who we are and who we appear to be. And that gap exists in every human life, not just in the lives of fictional serial killers who work in forensics labs and own boats. Now sleep, for real this time. The analysis is over. The thematic exploration has been concluded. The last footnote has been written. There is nothing left to do except let go, let the story settle into the deeper layers of memory where dreams are made, and allow your breathing to slow and your thoughts to soften and your body to become heavy in the best possible way. The Dexter timeline, from beginning to whatever comes next, is a long and winding road. You have walked every mile of it tonight. The shipping container, the code, the kills, the love, the loss, the resurrection. All of it is yours now, stored safely in the archive of a night well spent. Dexter Morgan's story continues somewhere in the fictional streets of New York City. Your story continues here, in your bed, in the dark, with the comfortable certainty that tomorrow will arrive exactly as it always does, bringing with it whatever small adventures and quiet challenges your own personal timeline has in store. No dark passengers required, only sleep, only rest, only the gentle, grateful silence of a story finished and a listener at peace. Good night.